The last real town sat an hour behind me, just a few gas stations and some busted-up ice shanties, plus the kind of bait shops that close for winter but never quite reopen. After that, it was all meltwater roads and slushy shoulder drifts, barely wide enough for the truck. By the time I reached the edge of the forest preserve, I'd already lost cell service. Snow still clung to the birch trunks in long vertical streaks, peeling at the edges where the light hit them. It was April, but it didn't feel like spring. Not here. Not in this stretch of northern Wisconsin where the last frost could come in May, and the thaw just meant the ground stayed wet longer. The ranger station wasn't much, just a slumped wooden shack with a sagging porch and a long-dead radio tower out back. Paint was blistered off the siding. The welcome sign had gone soft around the screws and leaned sideways like it was waiting for an excuse to fall. They said this post was temporary. A spring monitoring assignment. 1 season, maybe 2. Just enough to get away from the heat that had followed me out of Colorado after the wildfire report. They didn't say it outright, but I wasn't here by choice. I'd stepped on the wrong toes, questioned the wrong protocol, and now I was on an assignment no one else had wanted. Birch blight, water runoff, seasonal migration. That's what the clipboard said. I was here to take notes, collect tree samples, and submit reports no one would read until July. No tourists. No backpackers. Just slow trails through a preserve that hadn't seen human foot traffic since the snow came in. And it was quiet. Not peaceful quiet, just absent. No squirrels chasing up the trunks, no branches rustling overhead. The snow had started to rot in spots, exposing patches of black soil and yellowed grass, but the trees still stood like they were bracing for something. I set up inside the cabin that first day. The heater worked barely. There was no plumbing, no service, and the roof creaked every time the wind shifted. I went through the starter kit, trail markers, soil probes, sample containers, notebooks. At the very bottom of the gear locker was an envelope tucked into the lid. Unmarked. Inside was a laminated map, older than it had any right to be. There was no GPS overlay, and the ranger station wasn't marked anywhere, just blank forest, topography, and those faded ink circles near the eastern glacial marsh. Someone had written 3 letters and red across the top. The map didn't match the current trails. One loop crossed a section I knew had been sealed off for erosion control since the late 90s. Another ran right through the deepest part of the birch stand where no signage remained. I set it aside, figured it was a leftover from some retired ranger's files. But I kept it. Each morning I ran the circuit, marked trailheads, tested water pH in the marsh runoff, jotted changes in soil firmness and tree damage. It was all standard until the 4th day, when I found the first deer. It was lying under a fallen log, not far from the narrow footbridge over Blackwater Creek. Snow melt had soaked its back half, and the rest of it looked untouched. The body wasn't torn or shredded, just intact, too intact, as if nothing had touched it at all. Even the eyes were still there, wide and glassed over. Just lying there, like it had laid down and never got back up. I leaned in close, expecting frostbite damage or maybe a coyote's work. The skin had a waxed look. Stretched tight across the ribs. There were no flies buzzing around it, and the air didn't carry any trace of rot or decay, just silence. When I checked under the belly with a stick, I saw something that made my throat go dry. The antlers weren't on its head. They were buried upright in the mud nearby, both of them, positioned side by side like a pair of tools laid out for sharpening. I backed off and flagged the area with a red marker, filed the report under unnatural death, scavenger unknown. I didn't write what I actually thought. That it felt staged. That it looked placed. That night I couldn't get warm. The heater ran, the fire was going, but I sat wrapped in my coat just watching the slats in the window, listening. Not for wolves. For something bigger. Something slower. The fifth morning, I found a second carcass. Same condition. Different animal. A raccoon this time, hanging by its hind legs from a branch. No rope. No wire. Just stuck there, frozen in place. Blood pooled under its neck but hadn't run. It was like gravity had forgotten about it. The ground around it was untouched, no boot prints, no sign of anything passing through but me. Later that afternoon, I started hearing a sound I couldn't place. Not constant, just now and then when the wind dipped below the trees. A clicking, almost like distant chimes, but softer. Less melodic. The pine out front scraped the roof every time the wind picked up, and I told myself that's all it was. Loose branches. Ice cracking off the gutters. Nothing unusual. Until the seventh night, when I heard it while the wind was dead still. I was in the middle of writing my soil report when I noticed it again. Click, click, pause. Click. I stood up. Moved to the door. It stopped. I walked out onto the porch and held my breath. The moon was hidden, but the cloud cover gave just enough glow to outline the edge of the tree line. Nothing moved. No animals. No wind. I turned around to go back inside. And that's when I saw it, the antler. Black. Curved. Thicker than my wrist and twice as long. It was embedded straight through the roof of the cabin, piercing the ceiling beam in the common room like a thrown spear. There was no debris. No hole where it had crashed through. Just the antler, sticking out like it had grown there overnight. I stood beneath it for almost a full minute. The air felt wrong. The room was cold again, but not drafty. Still. Like the heat itself had gone quiet. I didn't sleep much after that. I marked it down as an act of vandalism. That's what the report said. That someone had thrown it, driven it through with machinery maybe, sometime while I was in the field. I filed it to the regional database and never got a reply. By the second week, I started avoiding the eastern trails altogether. Something about the way the trees leaned there, the way the ground felt underfoot. It wasn't erosion. It was tilt. Subtle, but real. Nothing lined up right. I'd mark a deadfall on the map and return the next day to find it shifted 20 yards to the left. Snow would melt in a pattern too precise to be natural. Always in rings. There was a day, one I haven't been able to explain, when I found one of my own trail flags moved. Torn down and tied around a stick like a little totem, left upright on the trail where I'd never placed it. The ground was bare beneath it, the frost cleared away in a perfect circle that hadn't melted anywhere else. That night, I left the cabin light off. I didn't bother with the fire. The air inside felt thick enough already. I sat by the window for a long time, watching the frost creep up the glass, waiting for the wind to start again, but it never did. Everything outside stayed perfectly still, like the woods were listening for something too. I didn't fall asleep so much as fade out. One moment I was watching the frost on the glass and listening to the heater cycle off again, and the next I was waking up with my boots still on and my notebook open on my lap. I checked the recorder. It had shut itself off after 20 minutes, just static and cabin creaks. My watch reads 6:18 a.m. The sky outside said otherwise. It was too bright for early morning. Too high. I stepped out onto the porch. A strange warmth hung in the air. Not spring warmth, just damp and still. Nothing moved. The birds were silent, and not a single branch let go of its melt. It was the kind of stillness that builds slowly, until you realize it's lasted far too long. There was something else, too. The smell. Not decay exactly, more like rot caught under standing water. Earth that had soured. I followed it a few hundred feet east, past the rock face behind the outpost where I'd flagged some erosion earlier in the week. A long drift of snow had collapsed overnight, revealing a depression in the hillside. I stepped around it at first, assuming it was runoff damage. That's when I noticed the beams, cut clean, squared off at the ends in a way no erosion or tree fall could explain. Someone had built this, long ago, and buried it deep enough to forget. I crouched down, cleared away some of the soaked pine needles and meltwater. Beneath it was a wood structure, old and half collapsed, but with definite shape, a root cellar, maybe. Or a crawl space. Built into the hill, reinforced with weathered timber. The entrance was partially buried under a rock slide, but the side wall had cracked open just wide enough to squeeze through. I didn't like it. Every part of me was telling me to mark it, report it, and come back with someone else. But I'd already gone weeks without seeing another ranger. If I left it unrecorded and the thaw pulled it further down the slope, it might be lost by summer. So I went in. The opening was tight, maybe 3 feet high at its tallest. I had to crawl partway on my elbows before it widened. The air inside was sharp and cold. Not fresh, not earthy. Stale. Burned. The walls were lined with flat stones. Some had collapsed inward. The floor was coated in mud, and in the center sat what looked like an old makeshift altar, a ring of melted wax pulled around deer bones, vertebrae mostly, arranged in a spiral that sloped inward like a sinkhole. Behind it was a sheet of rusted metal, warped around the wall in a half-curve. It was embedded with nails bent outward, as if something had tried to punch through from the other side. I reached for my camera. The flash failed twice before firing. When it did, the burst lit up the space in harsh white. For a second, I saw something on the far wall, scratches. Not claw marks. Not writing. Just a jagged grid of intersecting lines carved into the stone, like someone carving blindly, compelled to make the shape without understanding why. And then the light died. I blinked, adjusted, and crawled back out. When I checked my watch again, it read 12:47 p.m. I hadn't been inside for more than 15 minutes. No way. I double-checked my field clock, then my phone, even though there was no signal. All of them matched. The sun was overhead. I'd lost 6 hours. Back at the cabin, I ran the audio recorder. Nothing. Just wind. Then a faint rhythm I didn't catch until the second listen, clicks. Slow and uneven, like antlers tapping hollow wood. No breathing. No voice. Just the steady sound of something waiting. That night, I sat up trying to write down what I'd seen in the cellar. But the more I tried, the more the memory frayed. The grid on the wall wouldn't stay clear in my head. I'd close my eyes and see the outline, then lose it again before I could finish sketching it. I'd start drawing what looked like intersecting triangles, but my hand would drift, lines misaligning without me realizing. At some point I dozed off with the pen still in my hand. I woke to the sound of static, not from the recorder, but from the radio. It wasn't plugged in. The old base unit that hadn't worked since I got here was humming faintly, lights on. A voice was cutting in and out, swallowed by static, sharp with panic. I leaned closer. North Trail Junction, copy. I don't have visual, but something's moving fast. Then nothing but noise. I tapped the unit, checked the antenna. It wasn't even connected. Just looping a fragment. Like it had recorded something, or like it was replaying a call that had never been answered. I recognized the voice. Levi, the seasonal floater from 3 Lakes Post. I hadn't seen him since February, but we'd talked over shortwave a few times when I first arrived. He joked about my assignment, said they only send people up there when they don't want to hear from them again. I tried raising him. Nothing. In the morning, I hiked out toward the North Trail Junction where the call had come from. Fresh snow had dusted the upper trails, but not enough to hide the boot prints. I followed them up a ridge that curved east, passing between the birch stands and a section of trail that had half collapsed into the creek below. About a mile up, the prints stopped. No turning. No slide marks. Just stopped. Like the person had been lifted out of the snow. And about 10 feet up the nearest birch tree I saw it. A deer skull. Mounted sideways into the fork of the branches with Levi's orange ranger cap nailed to the forehead. The bark beneath it had peeled back. Clean vertical strips missing. The wood exposed underneath had deep, wet gouges like something had clawed downward, but from too high, and too straight. I called his name. Waited. Nothing answered. Back at the cabin, I checked the recorder again. Someone had removed the tape and replaced it with a blank. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even left it recording. But it was warm to the touch, as if it had only just stopped running. That night, I heard the pacing again. Heavy. Slow. Not animal movement. Not scampering or stomping. Just one set of steps, steady and deliberate, circling the cabin. I turned off the lights. Left the fire to gutter out. I waited in the dark, pressed flat to the inside of the door with my hand around the emergency flare launcher. The footsteps moved from the porch to the back wall. Then to the east window. Then back again. Scratching. It wasn't claws, and it wasn't metal, more like thick wood dragging slowly across wood, the sound of something heavy testing its weight. A slow, dragging pressure that made the planks under my boots flex just slightly. It stopped. Then started again near the side wall. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. After what felt like an hour, it was gone. Just like that. In the morning, I stepped outside and walked the full perimeter. No tracks. No claw marks. But hanging from the low branch of a pine near the porch was my recorder. Tied with twine, dangling just above eye level. It clicked 3 times, then played back my voice. Just 3 words. I saw you. I didn't remember falling. My leg just gave out. I must have hit the slope wrong, soft melt, loose gravel underneath. My left boot slid and I went sideways, hit the ground hard and twisted, the impact shooting up through my shoulder and ribs. I lay there for a second, breath locked in my chest, staring up at the bare branches overhead. Not a single bird. Not even wind. When I sat up, the GPS was still spinning. The same blank loop I'd seen all morning. Coordinates flashing. Compass frozen. It hadn't recalibrated in over an hour. I'd been trying to leave since dawn. First by trail, then the old road, then the river. Every path I took curved back. I'd walk for 40 minutes, landmarks passing behind me like they were supposed to, only to turn a corner and find the same outcropping I'd marked that morning. It wasn't just a loop. It was a trap. I took a slow breath and stood, feeling the pull in my ankle. It wasn't broken, but the pain made that step feel like it might be the last one I'd manage for a while. I shifted my weight, made it to a boulder near the trail, and sat. That's when I saw the carving. It was shallow, but fresh, cut into the bark of the birch beside me. A shape. 3 points connected by a curve, like the head of a trident tilted sideways. I didn't recognize it from the maps or any tribal notations I'd seen in the survey binder. But I'd seen it before. It matched one of the symbols from the wall inside the root cellar. I checked the tree next to it. Another mark, this one crossed through, as if something had tried to erase it. I walked 50 yards and found a third. This one had changed. The lines had bled outward, etched deeper than before, with smaller notches branching off like veins. I pulled out the old field journal I'd found under the floorboards. 1957. The pages were soft and water-stained, but the entries were legible. The first few were dry, trail reports, tree surveys, bird counts. But by page 12, the writing started to stutter. Notes in the margins. Symbols copied again and again. Then a line I hadn't noticed before, the trees are remembering. I sat down against the trunk, ankle pulsing. The light was already starting to fade. It wasn't that late. The sun had been out minutes ago, but now the shadows stretched long and gray-blue, like dusk had skipped the warning. I closed the journal and tucked it into my coat. I needed to get back before the cold came down hard. Even with the stove, the cabin only held warmth if I was there to tend it. I cut through a drainage path near the marsh, the same one I'd used on my first week here. Halfway down, I caught something in the trees ahead, a flicker of movement, just enough to throw me off. Not fast or loud. Just a tall shape slipping between the trunks, moving between the trunks so smoothly that it looked like it had always been in motion, never fully still. I paused, straining to hear anything through the brush. The forest around me was dead quiet, no leaves shifting, no creak of limbs above. I waited there, still as I could manage. Nothing answered. I pressed forward, stepping carefully around a fallen log, but before I could place my weight again, I caught it, movement again, this time closer. My boots slipped in the mud and sank deep. I tried to pull back, but my foot was stuck for a second too long. That's when I saw the figure. It wasn't the full thing, not the creature in its entirety, just the silhouette, partially veiled in a curtain of low fog that hadn't been there a minute earlier. It crouched, low and wide-shouldered, something branching from its back, antlers or limbs, I couldn't tell in that light. Its head tilted in my direction, slow and measured. I held my breath, heart locked in place. Then it moved forward through the mist, and I ran. I don't remember choosing a direction. I just moved. The fog came up fast, thick and wet, clinging to the ground and rising to my waist. I crashed through underbrush, branches slapping my face, one boot dragging from the pain in my ankle. Behind me, I heard it moving, slow at first, then faster, a heavy stride that didn't stumble or pause. The fog distorted the sound, but not enough. Whatever was back there wasn't walking. It was coming. I slipped into a low ravine, fell again, and landed hard against something half submerged in the mud. Wood, I thought at first. Then I saw the hinge. An old supply cache, Ranger issue, long rotted but still intact. I pulled the lid open, crawled inside, and slammed it shut behind me. The interior was cold and damp. Something crunched beneath me. I reached down, felt fragments. Bone. Smooth. Clean. Arranged along the walls like lining. I lay still. Breathing slow. Listening. I could hear footsteps above, slow, heavy, pressing down through the earth with the kind of weight that told me whatever it was, it knew exactly where I was hiding. Pressing weight into the ground, then lifting again. They moved past the pit, then back. Then stopped. I didn't dare look through the gaps. After what felt like hours, I heard nothing. The air in the cache had gone still. No smell. No dampness. Just an absence, like the space around me had been hollowed out. When I finally pushed the lid open again, the fog was gone. The ground was undisturbed. The forest looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Except for one thing. The symbol from the birch tree had been scratched into the dirt beside the pit, deeper this time. Carved with something hard and sharp. The lines were still wet. When I limped back to the cabin, I found the door slightly open. I was sure I'd locked it. Inside, nothing looked touched, but it didn't feel right. The air had a weight to it, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. I turned on the stove, checked the windows, and finally sat down at the desk. Then I saw the marks. They weren't there before. On the wall above my bed, on the inside of the door, even on the underside of the table, symbols, drawn in something dark and smeared, almost sticky. I touched one. It flaked under my finger, like dried sap. Or blood. I went to the mirror in the bathroom. Wiped it clear of condensation from the stove. There was something etched into the glass. A word. Not English. Not Ojibwe. But I'd seen it in the journal. A name. Antler Hollow. Sleep didn't come. I stayed by the door, lights off, shotgun laid across my lap like a weight I couldn't set down, every creak of the cabin stretching longer in the dark. Not because I thought I'd use it, but because it was the only thing in the room that felt solid. Sometime before morning, I heard whispering. Not from outside. From inside the walls. By the time I made it back to the cabin, the clouds had thickened into a low slate ceiling, and the trees stood darker than they had that morning, wet and dripping, their barks slick like stone. Snow had started to fall again, but this time it came in slow, dry spirals, the kind that didn't melt on contact. I left the lights off. There was a pressure building, one I couldn't name, like the woods had leaned in closer during the night, and something old was pulling through the trees just outside my reach. I set the stove to boil and locked the door behind me. It wasn't that I expected it to help, it just gave me something to do with my hands, something to keep them busy. I was halfway through taping the ripped corner of the old map when I heard it again. That sound. Not footsteps this time. Not pacing or breath. What I heard next wasn't footsteps, just the sound of antlers, shifting somewhere above the cabin. They scraped the rooftop in long, crooked arcs. Not fast, slow, like fingers dragging through wet gravel. I froze. The lantern was still lit, casting warped shadows across the cabin floor, and I watched as the beams shifted, first at the window, then near the stove. Whatever was up there, it was big enough to blot out the light when it moved. I reached for the shotgun. Didn't lift it, just held it. Across my knees. Same as I had the last time. For maybe 20 minutes, nothing happened. The sound stopped. The roof stayed still. The air didn't move. Then the east wall groaned. Not from wind. From weight. Something braced against it, slow and heavy, the sound of wood under pressure, then a single thud, like a palm hitting the planks just once. The window bowed inward just slightly. Then came the wind. All at once, hard enough to rattle the stovepipe and send the lantern rocking. The flame flared, almost went out. I braced myself and waited, counting seconds. It passed. When I stepped outside a few minutes later, there was nothing but snow. The porch was clear. The trees were still. The only thing left was a single mark on the doorframe, 3 prongs slashed low across the grain, jagged and uneven. Like the edge of a broken antler. The next morning, I went to check the glacial run below the eastern ridge. The path there cut through a drainage bed that had been eroding steadily since I arrived. The forest felt wrong that day. The trails were quiet, even for spring. I didn't hear a single chickadee or crow, not even the bark of a fox. Just the steady grind of the wind through the trees, and beneath it, something stranger. There was a clicking sound, soft at first, scattered like branches tapping glass. It came in irregular bursts, faint and uneven, with no rhythm to speak of. Almost like a throat clearing. I moved fast. Made it to the marsh boundary by noon. That's where I found Daniel's survey marker. It was snapped in half, the flag caught high in a tree. The plastic had been sheared, not torn, sliced like wet paper. And a few feet from the base, I saw the prints. They weren't boot prints, and they weren't hooves either, something strange, something caught in between the two. Something in between. The tracks were long, uneven, like the hind legs of a deer but placed wrong, angled like elbows. I followed them 30 yards before they vanished into a patch of snowless earth. When I leaned down, I saw why. It wasn't earth at all, just old fur, matted and brittle beneath the layer of pine needles, spread out like a forgotten pelt left to rot under the thaw. Pressed flat into the shape of ground, brittle and sun-bleached. Like something had shed its hide and walked out of it whole. I turned around. Started back. And that's when I saw it. A flash of red through the trees. A scrap of cloth fluttered there, bright against the dark bark, catching what little light filtered down through the branches. I broke into a run. Tripped twice. When I got close enough to see the outline, I stopped cold. It was Daniel's jacket. Wedged on a broken branch. Still zipped. Sleeves hanging. No blood. Just the jacket. Below it, a smear of dark sap on the bark and something else in the snow. A human tooth, cracked near the root, half buried in the snow like it had been pushed there. Whether placed with intent or simply by chance, I couldn't tell. I didn't call out. I just backed away and started toward the southern bluff at a full sprint. The air behind me changed. Not colder, emptier. Like something had moved out of it. I crossed the footbridge near the western break, the wood groaning under my steps, and kept going until I couldn't feel my legs. When I finally stopped, I was a mile out and panting hard. My hands were scraped. My coat was torn. I didn't remember falling. Back at the cabin, I started cataloging everything I'd seen. Each sign. Each sound. I drew the symbols again. Compared them against the journal. Tried to match them to tribal syllabics, old ranger code, even weather markers. None of it lined up. Then I noticed something. The symbols changed when I redrew them. Just enough to make the patterns feel wrong, angles slightly off, lines reversed in subtle ways that pulled the eye the longer you looked. Almost like they weren't meant to be copied. I lit the lantern. Left it in the window. Not as a signal, just so the thing outside would know I was still there. That night, I dreamed of the hollow again. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't dark, just wide open, filled with the quiet shape of bone. And somewhere beneath it, antlers curling through the earth like roots, twitching. I didn't fall asleep so much as fade out. One moment I was watching the frost on the glass, and the next I was waking up with my boots still on and the recorder blinking red. It had shut itself off sometime during the night, just static and cabin creaks when I played it back. Outside, a heavy, unnatural stillness clung to the forest. There was no bird call, no snowmelt drip, not even the sound of wind threading through the branches. It felt like something was holding its breath. I stepped out onto the porch just in time to hear a crack echo off the ridge. The crack of a gunshot cut through the stillness. I flinched, heart hammering against my ribs, the sound echoing like it had come from just over the next rise. It came from the east side, near the old marsh path. I grabbed the shotgun and my coat, didn't stop to log anything. There were only 2 other rangers within hiking distance, and I hadn't seen either of them in weeks. If one of them was signaling, it wasn't for help, it was a warning. I reached the first rise fast, cutting through underbrush and ankle-deep meltwater, and followed the sound toward the far ridge. I spotted the prints, too wide, too deep, and shaped like hooves, not boots. Spaced far apart, dug deep into the slush like something too heavy had passed through fast. Something tall. Up ahead I spotted movement, a flicker of orange near the edge of the tree line. I shouted Levi's name. No answer. Just a thud, distant but heavy, like something dropping into snow from a height. Then another. Closer. I ducked low, moved fast, sticking to the brush line. Whatever was out here wasn't trying to hide. The hoofprints turned erratic, now circling in broken spirals. I stopped when I saw the blood. A smear across a downed tree, fresh, but no body, and no trail to follow. No drag marks. Just that streak of red laid out like a warning. A sound rose from the trees ahead, a chime, faint and brittle, like bone knocking hollow against bone. It wasn't metal, and it wasn't glass. It had the brittle, hollow sound of something older, bone against bone, caught in the wind. A hollow, clattering sound, like bone tapping against bone in the wind. I followed it another 100 yards before I saw the tree, split at the base, bark peeled upward like a wound. Hanging from the center was Levi's cap. Beneath it, a second flare launcher. Spent. I scanned the woods. Nothing moved. Then a sound behind me, closer than it should have been. I turned just as something bolted through the trees on the opposite ridge. It was fast. Almost too fast to track. But I saw the shape, tall, hunched, and wrong in every way that matters. No face. Just antlers. Black and crooked, threading outward like roots. It didn't charge. It circled. I raised the shotgun, fired once. The shot hit a tree, splintered bark. The thing vanished behind the slope. I gave chase. Branches tore at my coat, snow caught my boots. The trail curved hard around a dry wash, and I nearly lost it in the soft ground. But I kept moving. Had to. I wasn't going to let it vanish again. Not like the last time. I reached the edge of a shallow ravine when I heard the whistle, a long, slow inhale that didn't end. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else pretending to be both. The sound was coming from everywhere. Then I saw it again, just ahead, crossing the ravine in 3 strides, not touching the snow. It left no tracks. I fired again. The creature staggered mid-stride. Not from the hit, but like it had been surprised. It turned toward me, not fully. Just enough for one crooked antler to catch the light. And then it dropped out of sight. I didn't follow, not then, and not into that hollowed-out stretch of woods that looked too still, too quiet, like it was waiting for something to step wrong. Instead, I backed up, watching the trees, listening. The wind had picked up, sharp with the smell of soil turned wet and sour. I moved fast back toward the cabin, never lowering the gun. I stayed awake, pacing between the windows, shotgun in hand, every board in the floor creaking like it might give me away. The blood had been real. I'd seen the smear, thick and bright, still steaming in the cold. If it could bleed, it could die. But it was smarter now. Bolder. It had followed me once before, quiet and circling. This time, it wasn't circling. This time, it was coming straight for me. I didn't make it to the door. The whispering came from behind the walls, low, fractured words that bent in on themselves like someone trying to imitate speech without knowing how it worked. My fingers tightened around the shotgun. I backed away from the window and kept my eyes on the corners, listening. The sound moved through the structure like breath in the beams, like pressure building under the floor. Then the wall cracked. A sharp sound sudden. One board near the door bowed inward, then split clean across. Cold air spilled through, but there was something else, too. A smell like wet fur and bone dust, so strong it made my eyes burn. I stumbled back just as the hinges buckled and the cabin door blew open. The thing stepped inside. It ducked under the splintered frame, antlers brushing the top beam. Its body was wrong, thin but tall, stretched, with skin that didn't move right. The face wasn't a skull, not exactly, but it had no eyes, only sunken sockets, shadowed and empty. The light didn't catch on them. I fired once. The sound filled the room, deafening. The creature flinched but didn't fall. It staggered, then tilted its head sideways, listening. Like it was reading the air. Blood, black, thick, too slow, leaked from where the shot hit. Not enough. I backed toward the stove, reloading with one hand. The creature followed in slow, uneven steps, favoring one leg. Its joints didn't bend right. The closer it came, the worse the pressure got in my ears. I threw the lantern. The flame caught as it shattered. The floor lit up fast, old timber, dry from the heat. Smoke poured upward and for a second the thing reeled back. I used that second to run. I didn't go for the trail. I went for the marsh. The bones. The symbols. The cellar pit. I didn't know why exactly, only that whatever this thing was, it had circled that place. Like it mattered. like it was drawn to it. Branches tore at my coat. Blood ran down my leg. My ankle throbbed with every step, but I didn't stop. The forest felt like it was tilting inward, like every tree had turned to face the same direction. I crossed the ridge and slid down the wet slope into the hollow. The fog was back, low and white, and my boots sank deep into the moss. At the center, the collapsed cellar stood open like a mouth. I dropped to my knees and clawed through the leaves and bone fragments. The symbols were still there, carved in the metal, smeared in ash. I took the antlers from my pack. I'd wrapped them in old cloth, carried them ever since that first week like I didn't want to let them go. I laid them down in the spiral where the wax had once pooled. The creature was close now. I could hear it in the trees, no distinct footsteps, just the heavy shift of weight through the underbrush. The sound of something too large moving slowly, breathing in a way that didn't sound human, or even animal. I fumbled with my belt, and pulled out the last of my flares, the cold metal shaking in my hand. Only 2 remained, and I pressed them down into the earth on either side of the circle, hoping it would be enough, though I couldn't say why. Jammed them upright into the earth, one at each side of the ring. I stood still, heart racing, and waited in the heavy silence. Then the sound stopped, cut off like a breath held too long. A shape moved through the mist. Towering. Silent. The antlers rose like twisted roots, and its skin flickered at the edges, as if its body was still pulling itself into reality. It stepped closer, one long stride at a time, its limbs folding unnaturally as it advanced. I pulled both flares from my belt and struck them together, the red light catching instantly. Red light filled the hollow, casting long shadows. The creature screamed, not a sound I could describe. It wasn't rage. It was hunger interrupted. Like it had waited too long, and something had been stolen from it. It lunged, but stopped just short of the ring. The symbols carved into the metal began to smoke, fine tendrils rising like steam off a skillet. Heat pulsed upward, not the kind you'd feel from fire, but from friction, like the air itself was straining to hold something back. The creature slowed its pace and began to move in a wide arc around the ring, circling once, then again, as though testing the limits of whatever held it there. Its limbs twitched, spasming like something was pulling it backward, not physically, but deeper than that. Its chest convulsed, shoulders jerking as if the bones beneath had started to crack inward. A long groan escaped it, low, fractured, before its legs gave out and it dropped to one knee just beyond the ring. But it didn't fall. It rose again, unsteady, and backed away into the trees, shuddering with each step. It vanished without a sound, like it had been swallowed whole by the forest itself. My legs buckled beneath me, but I didn't let myself fall there in the hollow. I crawled, dragging myself uphill through the wet moss and roots until the slope leveled out near the creek bend. I could still see the tree line behind me, but it felt further now, like something had lifted. I slumped against the side of a half-rotted log, chest heaving, vision tunneling. The air was thin and sharp in my throat. I could barely feel my fingers anymore. The flares had gone out, and the mist was clearing. A faint breeze moved through the trees overhead, like the forest was finally letting something go. Then I collapsed for real. Everything after that was fractured. I remember crawling from the hollow, then nothing. I woke to light, real daylight, and voices. 2 rangers from the southern station had been sent up for a storm sweep. They found me barely conscious near the creek, dehydrated and half frozen. I don't remember the ride out. I stayed in a hospital for 6 days. No one could explain the injuries, or the burns on my palms. My report was taken, then rewritten. The original disappeared. The cabin burned down. Electrical fire, they said. No mention of antlers. The site was flagged as unstable. Closed for restoration. I checked again 2 months later. Satellite imaging showed nothing but trees where the hollow had been. The grove didn't register anymore. as if the land itself had shifted to hide it. I kept the journal. I don't go north anymore. Not past 3 Lakes. Not anywhere near the old preserve. But sometimes, if I wake up early enough, I can hear it through the trees outside my house. A soft, hollow sound. Like antlers tapping wood.